Tonight's story is actually this selection I put together for our friend Lucretia Brandenburg when she had a really cool evil fairy tale sim. We're going to do a series of stories there for Lucretia. Howsomever, um, Lucretia disappeared, but I was left with this cool selection of stories. And so I was going to do it on the 20th of October, but I wasn't here. And so we're doing it on the 3rd of November, finally. And here we go. Cursed. It's a prick of blood, the bite of an apple, the evil eye, a wedding ring, or a pair of red shoes. Curses come in all shapes and sizes, and they can happen to anyone, not just those of us with unpopular step parents. And thank you for the way in from Streamland that you can hear me too. Thank you. Darkness falls across the land. The midnight hour is close at hand. And so the curse begins. The curse crawled silent as a serpent through the roots of the hedge. Wallflowers wilted, though the garden remained as if painted on the ground. A hawk in a deep stoop falls bill first onto the loam. The moat serpent floats. Horses stop between one whinny and the next. 3 guards, still on duty, draw no pay for 100 years, but still keep most of the castle safe. Though not the tower room where the princess sleeps. She is caught between one sigh and the next, lips pursed as if inviting a kiss, or tasting the sourness of age, or regretting everything except the needle in her palm. As red as blood, as white as snow. Yes, Snow did not find him charming. When she looked into his dark, dark eyes, she saw not the fizzy delight of charm, but the flicker of a tongue through sharp teeth. My dear, it would please me more than anything in the wide world to see this ring upon your finger, for it would mean your consent to be my wife, he said as he knelt before her. A murmur went around the room, a rush of approval from the courtiers, for what more could their princes want than this prince? He was wealthy and handsome and came from a fair land, or so it was said, for his land was so distant that none of them had ever seen it. His manners were so delightful that he had immediately been dubbed Prince Charming, though of course no one would show such disrespect by calling them this within his earshot. Yes, Snow did not find him charming. When she looked into his dark, dark eyes, she saw not the fizzy delight of charm, but the flicker of a tongue through sharp teeth. He held the ring before her, his smile white and easy and expectant. Charming had chosen his moment well. She could hardly refuse him before the whole court, however much she wished to throw the ring back in his face. Snow's eyes flickered to the king and queen. Her stepmother's mouth was flat, the corners of her eyes tight with fear. Snow's father nodded and smiled like an old dotard, like he was enchanted, which he was. The prince waited, for he had all the time in the world to wait, and he knew what her answer must be. She saw all of this in his face, in the unworried curve of the lips, in his eyes where the snake coiled. Of course I will, she said, and she was proud that her voice was clear and ringing and that no one in the court would hear the terror boiling inside her. She wished she had the courage to run, but a princess is raised to be polite above all else. And if she refused him, there would be consequences. Consequences, as always, meant war, particularly when a man's pricked honor was involved. Snow loved her country and her people. She did not wish for them to suffer. She had to take this ring, and even though she knew it was a trap. Snow saw, as if from a distance, her hand moving slowly towards Charming's. She saw the fine trembling of her blood beneath her white skin. She saw the triumph slither across his fair face as he took her fingers. Her body quailed as he touched it. The shudder seemed to please him all the more. His grip tightened on her hand until it was hard enough to bruise, and she thought he might be testing her to see how much she would take before she cried out. I will not, she thought, and her teeth ground together. I will not give him the pleasure. The moment the ring had slid over her knuckle and into place, it clamped down cruelly and bound to her skin with small, sharp teeth. The ruby shifted in its setting, seeming to watch her with like a bloodied eye. His arm wound through hers, looking for all the world like a lover's clasp as they turned to face the court. Only Snow knew he held her in place, her butterfly wings flapping uselessly under his pin. He kept her close for many hours, and she felt her smile straining, but it did not falter. Snow would not show him weakness, though she knew he felt her revulsion and seemed to secretly delight in it. As soon as she was able, she slipped out of his arm. "It is very close in here, my prince," she said, "and I must go and take some air." Of course, my princess, but hurry back to me, for I cannot abide a single moment without you, darling." Several of the young ladies, and even some of the older ones, who ought to have known better, clucked happily at this, murmuring about how fortunate their princess was to have received the love of such a devoted prince. Devoted, Snow thought bitterly as she slipped into the garden and tried not to think of it as running away. She only needed a moment to breathe, a moment apart from the miasma surrounding her. Snow went deep into the foliage where none might stumble upon her by accident. She paused near her favorite pond, all covered in thick green lily pads with fat frogs perched upon them. Iridescent dragonflies soared back and forth, alighting here and there, and weeping willows hunched over the water, trailing their leaves. Snow huddled into the secret shadows under the trees, twisting at the ring on her finger, though she knew it was fruitless. The metal looked like silver, although it didn't behave like any ordinary silver she had ever seen. As she twisted it, the ring bit in harder, its little teeth pushing under her skin until blood welled up and Snow cried out. "It won't come off that way, though I expect you already know that." "Mother," Snow said. She ran to her stepmother, who stood still and weeping at the edge of the pond, her hands twisted together in grief. The queen folded Snow in her arms, and they cried together, for she loved Snow as if the girl were her own daughter, and she had been the only mother Snow had ever known. After the storm of weeping passed, they went under the tree again, and they sat together in silence. The queen put a finger over her lips to show that Snow should ask no questions, but her other hand, she pantomimed Snow dipping the hand bound by the terrible ring into the water. Snow wondered at it, but she obeyed, because her stepmother knew many things that Snow did not. The queen had been born in an enchanted land. Some of the enchantment clung to her still, and she could sometimes make little miracles happen. The moment Snow put her hand into the pond, she felt something shift and quiet. She had a strange sense that the eye inside the ruby had been blinded. The queen read the expression on Snow's face, for they were close in heart, if not in blood, and nodded. "Yes, sometimes water can subdue the magic, my love. Though it is only a temporary reprieve, as soon as you take it from the pond, the ruby's eye will open again." "So it is spying on me," Snow said. "I thought it was, though I nearly forgot it after it bit me." The queen nodded. "This prince has powers even I have never seen. He casts his spell on your father so quickly and completely that I never had the chance to stop it or even soften it. But I know that if your father were awake and himself, he would never consent to this marriage." "But he is not awake. And there's not himself, and my 3 brothers are all away on affairs of the kingdom. There's no one to defend me from this wolf in our midst." "Yes, we shall have to do what we can, for all that we cannot wield a sword against him," the queen said grimly. "I would not have you harmed, my dear. And he does mean you harm. There can be no mistake about that." Snow nodded. "Oh, yes, I can feel it, though I don't understand why, or why he came here for me in the first place, or even why his charms don't seem to affect you or me." "He came for you because of the same reason he cannot affect you," the queen said, and stroked Snow's hair. "Your mother had a little enchantment in her too, just a drop, and that drop was passed on to you, her last-born child. Oh, my dear, it's not enough for you to have to weave spells, but enough to defend against them, enough to keep that net that he casts on all the others away from your eyes." Snow was surprised to hear of the enchantment in her own mother, though not as surprised as she ought to be. "I must have known, somewhere deep down, I must have felt it," she thought. "Besides, it doesn't matter now. The only thing that matters is that this prince wants me for it. If my power is so little, then why would it interest him? Surely a man with magic like his would want a true enchantress as his wife. No one who could pass the gift into his bloodline." The queen tapped her fingers against her knee, as if contemplating if she should tell Snow what was in her mind. Whatever it is that troubles you, you should tell me, Snow said. I may not be married to him yet, but I am well and truly bound to him now. The Queen sighed. It is only a rumor, nothing more. When I lived in my own land, I heard stories of this prince's father. They said that he had many wives, and each one disappeared, never to be seen again. But it cannot be true, for if the princesses of many lands vanished, then there would be outcry. Their fathers would march upon the kingdom, demanding to know the fate of their daughters. So this part cannot be true, not really. Not really means it might be true. It really might. And what is the other part of the story? Snow asked. When this Charming arrived, I sent out a messenger in secret to the prince's land. Since he was so unknown to us, I thought it was the best thing. The messenger only returned last night. Though he rode there and back with all the haste he could manage, he told me that Charming has been married before, and that his first wife died. The prince, of course, has neglected to mention this. Did the messenger say of what the wife died? Childbirth, the Queen said. But you do not believe this, Snow said. There is no child in the prince's household, though I suppose it might have been stillborn. And no one saw his wife after she went into his castle, not even once. Snow felt a chill run over her skin. I can't let him take me. I don't think we have any choice about that now, dear. He will marry you, and you will go with him because you cannot refuse without causing a war, the Queen said. I wonder if that was what he wanted, really, Snow said thoughtfully. He did bring a very large army for a prince who claims he came to court a wife. My messenger said that Charming's country is not fair, or even close to it, so mayhap you are right. We have many more resources than him, but I don't think he intended to leave without you in any case. Whether he gained you by fair means or foul is the way he looks at you. Yes, Snow said and trembled. I see the way he looks at me. But I will try to do what I can. First, we must remove that spy from your finger. It already swallowed some of your blood, so the charm is well fixed. But we might be able to poison it into releasing you. The Queen patted Snow's knee and said, Wait here. She went away into the garden and returned with an apple, a beautiful round red one and irresistible in its charms. From a fold of her gown, Snow's stepmother took various small vials. Did you think you were going to have to free me from enchantment this evening? Snow asked, surprised the Queen had all these items close at hand. Actually, I was hoping to poison the prince, like Rick said, but I never had the chance. He's very careful with his food, you know. Yes, Snow said. That boy who stands at his elbow tastes everything. Yes, well, I think perhaps he's just fond of pumpkin cider, but it was never a very good plan to begin with. I confess, only a desperate one. If he suddenly died of poison in our castle, then his troops, who mass outside our gates, would surely have attacked. And what, so you'll poison me instead? Snow asked, watching her stepmother drop various liquids onto the apple. I think I'd rather have the pumpkin cider, Mother. The Queen muttered some words as she did this, words that Snow did not understand with her mind but with her heart, words that sounded like the hot sun and the blowing sand and the cool dark of shadows beneath a pearled moon. They were the words of the Queen's homeland, that enchanted place where she had left because she fell in love with a king who lived in a far green country. I am tempering the charm, dear, so that it will not poison you to sickness. It is just enough to make the ring sick of your blood. But you must only eat one bite of this apple a day, and take care the ring does not see you doing it. For anything the ring sees, so too the prince will see. The Queen handed this apple to Snow. Snow took a single bite of the apple before tucking away in her skirts. The bite was strange in her tongue, spicy, something like pumpkin cider, but not quite. Not really sweet, and yet it left a trail of fire in her throat. I don't know what else I can do for you, the Queen said, except that the moment your brothers return, I shall send them after you. The prince cannot deny his wife's kin entry into his castle, and he cannot harm you as long as they are near. Snow did not say aloud what she was thinking, for she saw the same fear in her stepmother's face. What if I don't survive long enough for my brothers to find me? As soon as your hand is free of the ring, you can hide from him, the Queen said. Until then, any effort you make would be pointless, for he could track and find you as surely as any falcon. So hold your tongue, hide your heart, and pretend to be a good and loving wife until that day. And then? And then, my loving daughter, the queen said, you must run, run. The wedding took place 3 days later in the center of the court, with the sun shining through the high windows and the flower petals strewn upon the floor. Everyone smiled and cheered when the prince kissed their princess, and Snow held herself still and did not shrink from him, though she wanted to. When the prince pulled his head away, Snow saw puzzlement there, as if he expected something else. What is it, my prince? She asked in a low tone, as streamers and roses were tossed at them. It is only that your mouth is sweet like wine touched with spice. I expected the sweetness, but not the spice. She knew it was the poison apple that he tasted, and she feared that he might discover her secret, so she said in almost flirtatious manner that was very unlike her, I find that all seeing things sweet taste better with a little bite, don't you? He stared very deeply into her eyes, and Snow felt an uncomfortable pricking sensation all over, like he was trying to see into her heart. But she built up a wall of thorns all around her and kept her secrets there, and finally he looked away, a twist of dissatisfaction on his lips. They were to depart immediately after the wedding, for now the prince's business was concluded. He wanted to return to his own kingdom. He said that this was because he'd been away too long, he must secure his borders. But Snow knew it was because the sooner he secreted her away, then the sooner he could complete his plans for her. But I have many days of travel, she thought, as she climbed inside the carriage. I have time still. The prince had insisted, in a manner both smooth and uncompromising, that Snow had no need of a lady's maid to travel with her. I have many servants in my palace. There's no reason for one of yours to make such a long journey. The queen had tried to argue, to speak of the impropriety, but the king had only waved his hand in a vague way. Snow will be in the company of her husband. There can be no impropriety, huh? And of course the king's word was the final one. Oh, father, Snow thought in despair, what will you think when you wake up from this enchanted sleep? Will you be horrified at what you will have allowed to happen? And so Snow sat alone in the carriage with the curtains closed while her new husband rode his horse with his men. Every day she took a secret bite of the apple that the queen had given her, and every day the ring seemed to loosen just a little, though the gaze of the ruby never darkened. She tried not to worry about her future, or if she would even have a future. She tried not to worry about what would happen when he demanded his marriage rights. Thus far, her new husband was unfailingly polite and solicitous of her comfort. Each night when they made camp, he made certain the Snow was comfortable in the grand tent while he went outside to sleep. But she saw the gleam in his eyes, the one that said he was anticipating some future pleasure with her, and that gleam made her shudder and turn away. At last they arrived in the prince's country. Snow peered out the window of the carriage and saw only gray rocks, gray tree bark, heavy gray clouds that hunched over the land. There were hardly any crops here, and those that she saw were thin and sickly, the same as the people who tended them. How do the people survive here? Snow wondered. And then she thought that this must be a very unhappy kingdom if its ruler neglected his own people so. The prince's castle was perched high on a hill with a steep road that rose to meet it. All around the base of the castle was a huge field of boulders that made it impossible to reach the castle by any route except the road. One way in and one way out, Snow thought, eyeing the rocks. Unless one is very brave or very foolhardy. As the gates of the castle closed behind her carriage, she thought, I might be foolhardy. I may have to be. The prince offered his hand so Snow could climb from the vehicle. As she placed hers in his grasp, the ruby ring shifted on her finger. It was only a little, hardly noticeable at all, but the prince gave her a sharp glance. Some of the teeth have receded, Snow thought, and then she smiled at him with her very best princess smile and said, Where's the chatelaine? The prince narrowed his eyes and said, Yes, darling, my home is very unusual. You will see once we're inside. Snow was half sick from anxiety. Had the prince seen the movement of the ring, or did he think he imagined it? Did he suspect her? She'd hoped that the ring might loosen before they arrived at the castle. She'd had some notion of slipping out in the night and disappearing into the wilderness of the prince's country. But there was no wilderness here, no easy escape, and though the ring was not as tight as it had been, it still would not leave her finger. I must wait. I must bide my time until he cannot track me. He cannot find me. There was no man at the door of the castle to greet them, nor the chatelaine. There was no servant waiting inside to take Snow's cloak or to lead her to a room where a bath was waiting. There was only the ringing echo of the door slamming shut behind them. Snow stared around the empty hall, at the threadbare tapestries, the rotten straw covering the stone floor. The prince's face was no longer charming. There was no need for the mask now that he was away from the others. "Where are all the servants?" Snow asked. Her voice came back to her, a hollow thing in the joyless room. "Anything you require, this castle will provide. You need only ask." More enchantments, Snow thought. No nosy maids and lads to wander and wonder why the lady of the house is screaming. She longed to fidget with the ring, to see if she could free it yet, but instead curled her fingers into fists beneath the sleeves of her gown. She would not draw attention to the very thing the prince wished her to ignore. The apple was hidden in her skirt. There's only a little of it left now, the seeded core showing on all but one side. Snow could only hope there was enough poison left to free her. "When am I to meet your father?" she asked, for of course he was a prince because his father was still king. "Yes, darling, my father has not been feeling well of late. When he is better, I shall take you to him." This was patently a lie, but Snow said nothing. She had to stay quiet and submit for as long as necessary. She could not let him suspect that she was planning to escape. "Though where I will go and how I will get there, I have no notion." But that was for later, wasn't it? First, she had to get out from under his eye. Nothing was impossible. Nothing was possible at all until then. "You may go anywhere in the castle except the east wing," the prince said, waving his hand in the direction of a thin, curving stair to the left. "The castle is very old and is not safe for you there. Your room is this way." He indicated a wider stair that she should follow him. She did, her heart pounding, wondering what he would do now. Follow. But he only led her to a wooden door with a large red ruby set, and a ruby like a bloodied eye was the twin of the jewel in Snow's ring, and her mood fell further when she entered the room and discovered the jewel was visible on both sides. "Eyes everywhere. What am I to do?" "You may bathe and change and come down to dinner." His lips were curved in a terrible, satisfied smile again, as if he noticed her glance at the ruby. "He knows that I know, and it amuses him. He amuses him because he is certain I can do nothing about it. I am only a rat in a maze to him. No matter how I twist and turn, he is certain I cannot get out." "Thank you," she said very primly, and showed no sign of the surprise. She felt that there was a large tub of water on the corner of the room, steam rising gently from the surface. Aside from the from the tub, there was only a four-poster bed with a faded red blanket upon it. A white gown was laid over this for Snow to wear after her bath. As she slid the gown over her head, she wondered how she might bind the laces in the back without a maid. Then she cried out in shock and terror, for the laces tightened without the work of any hand. The sash was tightened about her waist. A large toothed comb was run through her wet hair, which was then bound up in braids and pinned at her crown. Throughout all of this, Snow made no noise except for her initial cry, though inside she trembled and shook. She would not show any weakness to the prince, who was surely watching and awaiting for her to panic. "I will not panic. I am a princess." Snow carefully laid her other gowns out on the bed and slipped the last bit of apple into her new gown, and her body blocking the view from the jeweled eye in the door. She thought the door might slide open without a touch, but she found she needed to open it the regular way. She also noticed there was a small, old-fashioned key in the lock. This she took and kept next to the poisoned apple, though she had no illusions that the prince would not have a key of his own. The prince sat opposite her at dinner, making light small talk that she answered without really listening. She noticed his hair was wet and assumed he too had bathed, though he hadn't bothered to shave his face. He had just the beginnings of a beard coming into his jaw, and the candlelight cast strange shadows that made it appear blue instead of dark as the hair on his head. When they completed their meal, Snow wondered what would happen next. At home, they would be singing or sewing or storytelling after a meal, or sometimes dancing. She did not wish to dance with her husband, nor did she think that music would echo sweetly in this hall. Any song would be fouled by the air. "You may go up to your room now. I have some business to attend to," he said. "Of course, my husband," Snow said, and climbed the stairs. Her heart lodged at the bottom of her throat. He would come to her when his business was completed, whatever that might be. There was no army to hear him now, as there had been on the road. Am I then to sit in my bedroom trembling like a little rabbit, waiting for the fox at the door to come and eat me at his pleasure? She entered the room and shut the door behind her. The red eye blinked at her, and she felt a sudden surge of anger. Why should I be spied upon like a criminal? Why should he have that satisfaction? At least with the ring I can tuck it in the folds of my skirt. Snow yanked from her traveling gown from the bed and tore the sash from it. She pulled several of the pins from her hair and tacked the sash upon the door, covering the ruby eye. A strange buzzing sound emitted from it as it was covered, like it was an angry bee trying to loose itself. See how you like that, Snow said. Then she took the key out of her pocket. She couldn't fool herself the prince would be kept out by such a feeble attempt, but she locked the door anyway. At least she would have a few moments to prepare herself while he unlocked it. A wisp of smoke curled out of the keyhole. Another enchantment, something to stop me from using the key? Snow bent down to get a closer look. She didn't see anything obvious, but she smelled something sweet and spicy in the air. The apple, she thought. The poison from the apple, it must have rubbed off on the key. She turned the knob and pulled the door. It held fast. Would it keep the prince from her bed? Snow's trunk had appeared in the room while she was downstairs at dinner. She took out her nightdress. She expected the ghostly hands to come and unlace her gown as they had laced it up, but there was nothing. Is that because I've covered up the eye on the door? She wondered. It was an interesting notion, to be sure, one that might have implications for Snow's freedom, but it didn't help her remove a gown that required an extra person to put it on in the first place. After several irritating minutes attempting to wriggle out of the white gown, Snow gave up and lay down on the bed in it, removing only the sash that pulled the gown close around her waist. She thought she would be far too terrified to sleep, but she must have dozed, for the next thing she knew it was dark and someone was fumbling at the door. Snow sat straight up, blood roaring. She slid the ruby red eyed ring beneath the coverlet so it would not know she was awake. The prince's voice came through the keyhole, the words indistinct but the meaning of them clear. He's trying to magic the lock open. She heard his voice rise in frustration, heard him curse, but the lock held fast. Open the door, my darling. Open the door, darling. There had never been a less affection in the word darling in all the history of the world. Snow kept still, so very still, more still than the smallest mouse caught in the maze of a cat. Snow White, he called out, low and crooning, and meant to seduce, to charm, to enchant. Open the door to your husband. I will not. His hand shook the knob. She felt his anger then, his frustration, his hunger, and his hunger was a terrible thing, a thing that wanted to consume her. It was like a crashing wave that pushed against the door, seeping through the grain of the wood, pummeling her. Her hands grasped the bedclothes for dear life. She bit hard in her lower lip so she would not whimper. Snow White, he said, and there was no more pretense now. Open this door, I say. You have no right to refuse me. Snow wondered how much worse it would be for her later, for she knew in some way that she's only staving off the inevitable. But she could not bring herself to open that door. She could not invite the wolf inside. After a time, the rattling of the doorknob ceased. She heard him laugh, low and dark. There's always tomorrow, my darling. Snow did not sleep again that night. The next morning she took the last bite of the apple. There was hardly any magic left in it at all, for it didn't burn with the same fire when she swallowed it. She knew some of the charm had come off on the key. Snow parted the curtains and opened her window aside. The outside air was thin and chill, but a weak sunlight filtered through the clouds. She turned the ring this way and that in the sun. The silver had a fine dark vein running through it that hadn't been there at the start, and she thought the eye appeared cloudy, but it might have been wishful thinking. She took a deep breath and unlocked her door. The prince was not lurking in the hallway, waiting to punish her as she expected. Snow padded softly down the stairs and found breakfast laid out on the table, but there was no plate for the prince, and he was nowhere to be seen. There was a small piece of parchment on her plate, a note written in a beautiful hand. My darling wife, I have other duties that I must attend to today, but I will certainly see you this evening. Snow thrust the note away from her. To anyone else's eyes, the note might look like the reassurance of a lover, but she recognized it for what it was, a threat and a promise. Snow took her place at the table and ate, for she couldn't think better if her stomach was full. She found that she was hungrier than she expected. She was reaching for another serving of toast when it happened. The silver ring flew off her left hand and landed in the butter dish. Snow's heart swelled, for now the ring was gone, she could escape. In fact, she could escape at that very moment. The prince was not there to stop her, and if any of the soldiers asked, she could simply say she was going out for a walk. She was their princess now, and they could not control her. She rose from the table with an idea of changing into something more suitable. The white gown was a flag that would draw all eyes to her in the grey landscape, and perhaps that is what he meant what to do when he gave it to her. That was when she heard the woman crying. Snow stopped, arrested by the sound. No, the woman wasn't crying. She was half sobbing, half screaming. The sound was coming from the east wing. Who cares? Run, run, run! Oh, sorry. Snow only hesitated for a moment. The prince had said not to go into the east wing, but Snow couldn't ignore a person in pain. What if the prince returns and catches you, she thought. What if you miss your chance to escape? But these were selfish thoughts, and perhaps they would have convinced Snow if the woman's sobbing hadn't grown louder. I can't, she said. I can't leave her, whoever she is. Snow mounted the stairs to the east wing. At least all the prince can see at the moment is the view inside the butter dish, she thought, and wiped her damp hands on her crumpled gown and tried not to be afraid. At the top of the stairs there was a long hallway, and at the end of the long hallway there was only one door. The woman's voice was fading, a thin, weak stream emitting from the room beyond. Snow ran to it, tugged on the handle, but the door held fast. She took the poison key from her pocket and slid it into the keyhole, and the door swung open. In the first room there were boxes on pedestals, boxes made of shining dark wood covered in jewels of every color. In the corner of the room there was a heavy red curtain that must have led to another room. There were terrible noises coming from that room, and Snow hesitated because her stomach and lungs and throat were filled with terror so thick she could hardly breathe. She tiptoed past the boxes until she reached the last one. This one was open, as if it were waiting for something, and it was covered all over with red jewels like the one in her ring. For me, she thought with sudden certainty, and then she had to know what was in the others. She touched the lid of the box beside the empty one and it opened. Inside was a heart, red and lush and beating. Boom, 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 boom. Snow opened the next box, and her hands shaking found another, just as fresh and impossible as the first. She stared at all the boxes, dozens of them, all around the room, remembered that the queen had told her of the prince's father and the many wives that had disappeared. And the prince himself had a wife before Snow, and she too had disappeared. Snow stared at the red curtain and heard terrible noises coming from the next room. She did not want to know, but she had to. She pulled the curtain aside. Her husband's face was buried in something that might have once been a woman, though all that was left of her now was meat. When Snow pulled the curtain, he looked up at her from his meal, and she saw that his face had overnight grown a thick blue beard, and his eyes were as red as the blood that ran over his chin. He smiled, and Snow thought it was a travesty to call such a thing a smile. Naughty, naughty girl, her husband said. I told you to stay out of the east wing. And then Snow took Mag's advice and ran. She heard his laughter echoing behind as she fled down the hallway, down the stairs to the front door, but no matter how she tugged on the handle, it would not open, and there was no hole for the magic key. Where are you running to, my little bride? Prince Charming called from the top of the east wing stairs. Snow ran for the opposite stairs, not knowing what she would do or where she could go, only knowing that she had to escape, to stay out of his grasp. As she passed the table, she saw the poison ring sunk into the butter. Without really knowing why, she grasped the ring and a handful of butter with it and kept running up the west wing stair. There's no escape, Snow White, her husband called. His voice sounded amused and unhurried and far too close behind her. None of my brides have ever escaped, no matter how they scream and cry and run. I do like it when they run. Keep running, my little dove. It makes you all the sweeter when I catch you. Snow fled to her room, thinking that she could lock the door on him again, but the magic had gone out of the key, and the lock would no longer rebel against its master. She backed away from the door as it swung open, her mind repeating the same phrase over and over. What shall I do? What shall I do? Butter seeped through her fingers, and her heart hammered so hard she thought it might leave her body. Oh, but it will leave my body, won't it? He will cut my heart from me and keep it in a box of prize like all the others. He seemed enormous as he pushed through the door frame, twice as large as he'd been before, and his hands were red and sticky and reaching for her. There's nowhere for you to flee, so you should be a good little girl and let me do what I wish to you, Snow White. I'm only going to do it anyway. She saw all her terrors reflected in his eyes. The breeze from the open window behind her muffled her white gown. His fingers curled, ready to tear it from her. No, Snow thought, I will not. I will not be a good little girl ever again. He opened his mouth and bent toward her throat. To kiss, to bite? Snow never knew. And she took the fistful of butter and the poison ring inside it and shoved it all inside his maw. He choked, then reflexively swallowed, and the butter made the ring slide down his gullet. Bah! What have you done? What have you done? He said, clawing at his own throat, tearing away long bleeding strips of skin. Smoke rose from his mouth and seeped out of the corners of his eyes, and the blackened veins rose under the surface of his face. What have you done, Snow White? He lunged for her, and she darted out of his grasp, revealing the open window. Snow pushed him as hard as she could. He screamed as he fell, and she heard his terror and his fury, and she was glad. After a long while, he stopped screaming, and she was able to look out. Far below, she saw his broken body on the rocks that surrounded the castle. And off in the distance, there was dust rising from the road, as Snow watched 3 figures emerged, riding fast, her brothers, coming to take her home. See, a happy ending, not tragic at all. Well, depending on your point of view, I suppose. Poor little puppy, kicked out a window. Oh. Well, let's see what Neil Gaiman can bring us tonight, This is the Troll Bridge. When Jack was a young boy, his world was full of ghosts and ghouls, but one such monster, a ravenous and hideous troll, would haunt him long into manhood. It pulled up most of the railway tracks in the early 60s. When I was 3 or 4, they slashed the train service to ribbons. This meant there was nowhere to go but London, and the little town where I lived became the end of the line. My earliest reliable memory, 18 months old, my mother away in a hospital, having my sister and my grandmother walking with me down to a bridge and lifting me up to watch the train below, panting and steaming like a black iron dragon. Over the next few years, they lost the last of the steam trains, and with them went the network of railways that joined village to village, town to town. I didn't know the trains were going. By the time I was 7, they were a thing of the past. We lived in an old house on the outskirts of the town. The fields opposite were empty and fallow. I used to climb the fence and lie in the shadow of a small bulrush patch and read. Or if I were feeling more adventurous, I'd explore the grounds of the empty manor beyond the fields. It had a weed-clogged ornamental pond, a low wooden bridge over it. I never saw any groundsmen or caretakers in my forays to the gardens and the woods, and I never attempted to enter that manor. That would have been courting disaster. Besides, it was a matter of faith to me that all old empty houses were haunted. Well, at least I hope so. It is not that I was credulous, simply that I believed in all things dark and dangerous. It was part of my young creed that the night was full of ghosts and witches, hungry and flapping and dressed completely in black. The converse held reassuringly true. Daylight was safe. Daylight was always safe. A ritual. On the last day of the summer school term, walking home from school, I would remove my socks and shoes, and carrying them in my hands, I walked down the stony, flinty lane on the pink and tender feet. During the summer holiday, I would put those shoes on only in duress. I would revel rather in my freedom from footwear until the school term began once more in September. When I was 7, I discovered the path through the wood. It was summer, hot, bright, and I wandered a long way from home that day. I was exploring. I went past the manor and its windows boarded up and blind across the grounds and through some unfamiliar woods. I scrambled down a steep bank and I found myself in a shady path that was new to me and overgrown with trees. The light that penetrated the leaves was stained green and gold, and I thought I was in fairyland. A little stream trickled down the side of the path, teeming with tiny, transparent shrimps. I picked them up, I watched them jerk and spin on my fingertips, and I put them back. I wandered down the path. It was perfectly straight, overgrown with short grass. From time to time, I would find these really terrific rocks, bubbly, melted things, brown and purple and black. If you held them up to the light, you could see every color of the rainbow. I was convinced they had to be extremely valuable, and I stuffed my pockets with them. I walked and walked down the quiet golden green corridor and saw nobody. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't thirsty. I just wondered where the path was going. It traveled in a straight line and was perfectly flat. The path never changed, but the countryside around it did. At first, I was walking along the bottom of a ravine, grassy banks climbing steeply on each side of me. Later, the path was above everything, and as I walked, I could see and look down the treetops below me and the roofs of occasional distant homes. My path was always flat and straight, and I walked along it through valley and plateaus, valleys and plateaus. And eventually, in one of the valleys, I came to the bridge. It was built of clean red brick, a huge curving arch over the path. At the side of the bridge were stone steps cut into the embankment, and at the top of the steps a little wooden gate. I was surprised to see any token of existence of humanity on my path, which I was now convinced was a natural formation like a volcano. And with a sense of more of curiosity than anything else, I had, after all, walked hundreds of miles, so I was convinced, and I might be anywhere. I climbed up those stone steps. I went through the gate. I was nowhere. The top of the bridge was paved with mud. On each side of it was a meadow. The meadow on my side was a wheat field. The other side was just grass. They were caked imprints of huge tractor wheels of the dried mud. I walked across the bridge to be sure. No trip-trap, no bare feet were soundless. Nothing for miles. Just fields and wheats and trees. I picked an ear of wheat. I pulled out the sweet grains, peeling them between my fingers, chewing them meditatively. I realized then that I was getting hungry, and I went back down the stairs to the abandoned railway track. It was time to go home. I was not lost. All I needed to do was follow my path home once more. There was a troll waiting for me, though, under the bridge. I'm a troll, he said. And then he paused and added, more or less as an afterthought, for roll the old roll. He was huge. His head brushed atop the brick arch. He was more or less translucent. I could see the bricks and trees behind him, dim but not lost. He was all my nightmares given flesh. He had huge, strong teeth, rending claws, and strong, hairy hands. His hair was long, like one of my sister's little plastic gonks. Its eyes bulged. He was naked, and his dangly bits hung down from the bush of gonk hair between his legs. I heard you, Jack, he whispered in a voice like the wind. I heard you trip-trapping over my bridge, and now I'm going to eat your life. Now, I was only 7, but it was daylight, and I do not remember being scared, and it was good for children to find themselves facing the elements of a fairy tale. They are well equipped to deal with these. Don't eat me, I said to the troll. I was wearing a stripy brown t-shirt and brown corduroy trousers. My hair was also brown. I was missing a front tooth. I was learning to whistle between my teeth, but I wasn't quite there yet. No, I'm going to eat your life, Jack, said the troll. I stared the troll in the face. My big sister's going to be coming down the path soon, I lied. She's far tastier than me. Eat her instead. The troll sniffed the air and smiled. You're all alone, Jack. There's nothing else on the path. Nothing at all. Then he leaned down. He ran his fingers over me, and it felt like butterflies were brushing my face, like the touch of a blind person. Then he snuffled his fingers and shook his huge head. You don't even have a big sister. You've only a younger sister, and she's at a friend's house today. You can tell all that from my smell, I asked, amazed. Trolls can smell the rainbows. Trolls can smell the stars, he whispered sadly. Trolls can smell the dreams you dreamed before you were ever born. Come close to me, and I'll eat your life. I've got precious stones in my pocket, I told the troll. Take them, not me. Look. I showed him the lava jewel rocks I'd found earlier. Clinker, said the troll. The discarded refuse of steam trains. Those are no value to me. He opened his mouth wide, sharp teeth. Breath smelled of leaf mold and underneath of things. Eat, now. He became more and more solid to me, more and more real, and the world outside became flatter, began to fade. Wait. I dug my feet in the damp earth beneath the bridge, and I wiggled my toes, held tightly onto the real world. I stared into his big eyes. You don't want to eat my life, not yet. I'm only 7. I haven't lived at all. There are books I haven't read yet. I've never been on an airplane. I can't whistle yet. Not really. Why don't you let me go? And when I'm older and bigger, more of a meal, I'll come back to you. The troll stared at me with eyes like headlamps. Then it nodded. Ma. When you come back, then I'll eat you. And it smiled. I turned around and I walked down the silent straight path where the railway lines had once been. After a while, I began to run. I pounded down the track in the green light, puffing and blowing until I felt a stabbing ache beneath my ribcage. The pain of a stitch, and clutching my side, I stumbled home. The fields started to go as I grew older. One by one, row by row, houses sprang up with roads named after wildflowers, respectable authors. Our own home, an aging, tattered Victorian house, was sold, torn down. New houses covered the garden. They built houses everywhere. I once got lost in the new housing estate that covered 2 meadows I had once known every inch of. I didn't mind too much the fields were going, though. The old manor house was bought by a multinational, and the grounds became more and more houses. It was 8 years before I returned to the old railway line, and when I did, I was not alone. I was 15 then. I changed schools twice that time. Her name was Louise, and she was my first love. I loved her gray eyes, her fine light brown hair, and her gawky way of walking, like a fawn just learning to walk, which sounds really dumb, for which I apologize. I saw her chewing gum when I was 13. I fell for her like a suicide from a bridge. The main trouble with being in love with Louise was that we were best friends and we were both going out with other people. Oh, I'd never told her I loved her, or even that I fancied her. We were buddies. I'd been at her house that evening. We sat in her room and played Radis Norvegicus, the first Stranglers LP. It was the beginning of punk, and everything seemed so exciting. The possibilities, the music, and everything else were endless. Eventually, it was time for me to go home, and Louise decided to accompany me. We held hands innocently, just pals, and we strolled the 10-minute walk to my house. The moon was bright, the world was visible and colorless, and the night was warm. We got to my house, we saw the lights inside, and stood in the driveway and talked about the band I was starting. We didn't go in. Then we decided that I'd walk her home, so we walked back to her house. She told me about the battles she was having with her younger sister, who was stealing her makeup and perfume. Louise suspected that her sister was having sex with boys. Louise was a virgin, but we both were. We stood in the road outside her house under the sodium yellow streetlight, and we stared at each other's black lips and pale yellow faces, and we grinned at each other. Then we just walked, picking quiet roads and empty paths. In one of the new housing estates, a path led us into the woodland, and we followed it. The path was straight and dark. The lights of distant houses shone like stars on the ground. The moon gave us enough light to see. Once we were scared when something snuffled and snorted in front of us. Snorkel. We pressed close, saw it was just a badger, laughed and hugged and kept on walking. We talked quiet nonsense about what we dreamed, what we wanted, and what we thought. And all the time I wanted to kiss her. And finally I saw my chance. There was an old brick bridge over the path, and we stopped beneath it. I pressed up against her. Her mouth opened against mine. And then she went cold and stiff and stopped moving. "Hello," said the troll. I let go of Louise. It was dark beneath the bridge, but the shape of the troll filled the darkness. "I froze her," said the troll. "I froze her so we can talk. And now I'm going to eat your life." My heart pounded. I could feel myself trembling. "No." "You said you'd come back to me, and you have. Did you learn to whistle?" "Yes." "That's good. I never could whistle." He sniffed and nodded. "I am pleased you have grown in life and experience. More to eat. More for me." I grabbed Louise, a taut zombie, and I pushed her forward. "Don't take me. I don't want to die. Take her. I bet she's tastier than me. She's 2 months older than I am. Why don't you take her?" The troll was silent. He sniffed Louise from toe to head, snuffling at her feet and her hair. Then it looked at me. "She's an innocent. You're not. I don't want her. I want you." I walked to the opening of the bridge and I stared up at the stars in the night. "But there's so much I've never done," I said partly to myself. "I mean, I've never had sex. I've never been to America. I paused. "I haven't done anything. Not yet." The troll said nothing. "I could come back to you when I'm older." The troll said nothing. I will come back. Honest, I will. Come back to me, said Louise. Why? Where are you going? I turned around. The troll had gone. The girl I thought I loved was standing in the shadows beneath the bridge. We're going home, I told her. Come on. We walked back and never said anything. She went out with the drummer in the punk band I started, and much later married someone else. We met once on a train after she was married, and she asked me if I remembered that night. I said I did. I really liked you that night, Jack, she told me. I thought you were going to kiss me. I thought you were going to ask me out. I would have said yes if you had. But I didn't. No, you didn't. Her hair was cut very short. It didn't suit her. I never saw her again. The trim woman with the taut smile was not the girl I had loved, and talking to her made me feel uncomfortable. I moved to London then, and some years later I moved back again, but the town I returned to was not the town I remembered. There were no fields, no farms, no little flint lanes, and I moved away as soon as I could to a tiny village 10 miles down the road where it was always 8 p.m. Always 8 p.m., but I continued on. I hope you can stay with me as we finish this one up. Because I moved with my family. I was married now. I was married with a toddler into an old house that had once, many years before, been a railway station. The tracks had been dug up. The old couple who lived opposite us used it to grow vegetables. I was getting older. One day I found a gray hair, and then another. I heard a recording of myself talking. I realized I sounded just like my father. I was working in London doing A&R for one of the major record companies. I was commuting into London by train most days, coming back some evenings. I had to keep a small flat in London. It's hard to commute when the bands you're checking on don't even stagger onto the stage until midnight. It also meant that it was fairly easy to get laid if I wanted to, which I did. I thought that Eleonora, that was my wife's name. I should have mentioned that before. I suppose I didn't know about the other woman. I got back from a 2-week jaunt to New York one winter's day. When I arrived at the house, it was empty and cold. She had left a letter, not a note, 15 pages. Neatly typed, every word of it was true, including the P.S., which read, "You really don't love me. You never did." I put on a heavy coat. I left the house. I just walked, stunned and slightly numb. There was no snow on the ground, but there was a hard frost, and the leaves crunched underneath my feet as I walked. The trees were skeletal black against the harsh gray winter sky. I walked down the side of the road. Cars passed me, traveling to and from London. Once I tripped on a branch half hidden in a heap of brown leaves, ripping my trousers, cutting my leg. I reached the next village. There was a river at the right angles to the road and a path I'd never seen before beside. I walked down that path, and I stared at the partly frozen river. It gurgled and plashed and sang. The path led off through the fields. It was straight and grassy. I found a rock half buried on one side of the path. I picked it up, brushed off the mud, and it was a melted lump of purplish stuff with strange rainbow sheen to it. I put it in the pocket of my coat. I held it in my hand as I walked, its presence warm and reassuring. The river meandered away across the fields. I walked on in silence. I'd walked for an hour before I saw houses. New and small and square on the embankment above me. And then I saw the bridge, and I knew where I was. I was on the old railway path. I'd been coming down it from the other direction. There were graffitis painted on the side of the bridge. Caustic words, Barry loves Susan, the omnipresent NF of the National Front. I stood beneath the bridge in the red brick arch, stood among the ice cream wrappers, the crisp packets, and single sad used condom, and I watched my breath steam in the cold afternoon air. The blood had dried into my trousers. Cars passed over the bridge above me. I could hear a radio playing loudly in one of them. "Hello?" I said, quietly, feeling embarrassed, feeling foolish. "Hello?" There was no answer. The wind rustled the crisp packets in the leaves. "I came back. I said I would. I did. Hello?" Silence. I began to cry then, stupidly, silently, sobbing under the bridge. A hand touched my face. I looked up. "I didn't think you'd come back," said the troll. He was my height now, but otherwise unchanged. His long gaunt hair was unkempt and had leaves in it. His eyes were wide and lonely. I shrugged and wiped my face with the sleeve of my coat. "I came back." 3 kids passed above us on the bridge, shouting and running. "I'm a troll," he said in a small, scared voice. Full roll-de-roll. He was trembling. I held out my hand. I took his huge clawed paw in mine. I smiled at him. It's okay, I told him honestly. Honestly, it's okay. The troll nodded. He pushed me to the ground onto the leaves and the wrappers and the condom, and he lowered himself on top of me. And he raised his head, he opened his mouth, and he ate my life with strong, sharp teeth. The end. No, it's not quite the end, but we're close. When he was finished, the troll stood up and brushed himself down. He put his hand into the pocket of his coat, and he pulled out a bubbly, burnt lump of clinker rock, and he held it out to me. This is yours, said the troll. I looked at him, wearing my life comfortably, easily, as if he'd been wearing it for years. I took the clinker from his hand. I sniffed it. I could smell the train from which it had fallen so long ago. I gripped it tightly in my hairy hand. Thank you, I said. Good luck, said the troll. Yeah, well, you too, I said. The troll grinned with my face. It turned its back on me, began to walk back the way I had come, toward the village, back to the empty house I had left that morning, and it whistled as it walked. Me? I've been here ever since. Hiding, waiting, part of the bridge. I watch from the shadows as people pass, walking their dogs, talking, doing the things that people do. Sometimes people pause beneath the bridge, to stand, to pee, make love, and I watch them. They say nothing and they never see me. Roll. I'm just going to stay here, in the darkness under the arch. Oh, I can hear you all out there, trip-trapping over my bridge. Oh yes, I can hear you. But I'm not coming out. And who can blame him, really? And if you'll give me the courtesy of just a couple more moments, we'll wrap this up. And the fate of the castle we started this evening, will it awaken again, or will it eternally sleep on? There's a shudder through the castle foundations. Hedges tremble, falls, felled by a curse's end. The hawk on the ground stirs, tragedy avoided. Feathers shaking as if in a strong wind, the flies begin to buzz like wind-up toys. Those who have not been invented yet. Palace guards click heels, stand at attention. There's no mention of a magic debt. Cook's wooden spoon suddenly descends on the shoulders of the potboy's old errors. The queen stretches prettily. The king roars a swear. It seems as if moments, not centuries, are here. Only in the tower's stillness, unlikely as love enters the room. Afraid of a blunder, it hesitates, looks around, takes a breath, and fills the space with wonder. And so the curse is ended for tonight. And so is our time together, and I do hope each of you have a very, very pleasant weekend.